really briefly set the stage for you. So we come to the end of the life of David. It has been a tumultuous life and a faithful life and a wild life in many, many respects. And we're going to talk about a little bit of that. But the one thing that I think we need to know and we need to keep in mind as we read chapter 2 is this, is that David has been the king for quite some time. Not only was he anointed as a child and kind of grew into his kingship, but he's been the king for quite some time at this point. And that matters because as a man in his 60s, he has been through the battles. He's a battle-tested king. He's been literally battle-tested. He's dealt with people trying to undermine him. He's dealt with a son who literally tried to overthrow him and take the throne from him. He's kind of seen it all. And as a man in his 60s, he is now going to pass the throne along to Solomon. Now here's the important note. Solomon, not battle-tested. Solomon, most scholars say, is somewhere between 17 and 22 or 23 years old. So I guess if we just pick in the middle, let's just say Solomon is 20. How many of you know, well, first of all, let's just get this out. How many of you are in your 60s? I was half kidding, but there you are. How many of you would trust the 20-year-old version of you with the life that you are now leading? A couple. You're like, it would be wild, but it would be a lot of fun. So here's the point, is David is going to pass his throne to Solomon, who has not been through the ringer. He's not been on the front lines with swords. He has not gained the respect of a lot of people. And so we're going to see a chunk of the scripture tonight that I think to our kind of modern 21st century sensibilities are going to seem like really violent and very like crass and like, why? There's got to be another way. And I want us to keep that in mind because so much of what David needs to pass to Solomon, he can only pass in words because Solomon hasn't lived the experience yet. Some of you already know about the life of Solomon, so you know that Solomon is going to figure it out in some ways, and then he's going to take advantage of some of the things David struggled with too, and he's just going to take it to the nth degree. But tonight we're going to jump in chapter 2, verse 1. You have an outline, and we're going to jump in. So when David's time to die drew near, he commanded Solomon his son, saying, I am about to go the way of all the earth. Be strong and show yourself a man. You could circle a man. I think the reason it says a man is because, well, Solomon is a man. So if you're thinking, well, what about being a woman? We're going to talk about it in a second, but Solomon, alas, is not a woman. So show yourself a man. Verse 3. How do you do that? Keep the charge of the Lord your God, walking in his ways and keeping his statutes, his commandments, his rules, and his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses, that you may prosper in all that you do and wherever you turn. If you're taking notes, you can underline in all that you do. That the Lord may establish his word that he spoke concerning me, saying, if your sons pay close attention to their way, to walk before me in faithfulness with all their heart and with all their soul, you shall not lack a man on the throne of Israel. The end verse there is not, it's basically saying, here's your legacy, David. If your legacy of following me is continued, your lineage will stay on the throne for how long? Eternity. In fact, we know in the Gospel of Matthew especially, who is related to King David? Jesus. Jesus is on the throne. That promise to David, probably David wasn't thinking that somehow the Messiah would reign forever in glory eternally, but he knew that as long as my kin follow the Lord with all their heart and their soul, my lineage will stay on the throne. Now I want to talk a little bit about keeping the throne. How many of you have seen like old Roman movies or Greek movies or basically any old movies about kings? The first thing they do when they get on the throne is what? You got to kill the old guys. Yeah, got to get rid of them. And then once there's a little bit of peace, the second thing they do is they begin trying to solidify to make sure that their blood is going to stay on the throne. So here's some of the things they do. They kill their enemies. Anybody who was like loyal to the previous king, even if they were a good guy, get rid of them. They do things like they start marrying their children off to various heads of state to different countries. They're trying to create alliances. They're trying to create offspring that basically will stay in the aristocracy. So we're actually going to find out if you kept reading. Anybody know who the Bible tells us Solomon marries first? The daughter of Pharaoh. He marries her. Why does he do that? Because he's following the way of the world, which is saying, if you want to keep this throne, this is what you got to do. You got to create an alliance. The other thing they do is they boost up the military. They make sure all the commanders are loyal to them, and they decide, hey, if anyone wants to try to overthrow me, I have all the violence at my disposal. You may know some of the stories of Rome, Caligula, Nero. These were very paranoid people, and what were they paranoid about? That people are always trying to take my throne away from me. So here's the interesting thing. Working backwards, God tells David, here's the one thing every king in the ancient world wants. You want your lineage to stay on the throne. How do you do it? You tell your children. I'm going to turn this mic down at the first break, I promise. You tell your children to follow the Lord. In fact, he gives 4 phrases that are basically saying the exact same thing in very slightly different ways. It's an emphasis. It says this: you keep his statutes, keep his commandments, follow his rules and his testimonies, as is written in the law of Moses. This is what I love about this. What is Solomon going to be known for? His wisdom. For building a temple, for his wisdom. They're going to say he's the wisest man who ever lived. I love that David, knowing full well that Solomon doesn't have the experience that he has, all he has to give to him are my words. And if I have to boil it down and say, here I am on my deathbed, this is a moment where somebody will take these words seriously. What does he say to him? Follow the Lord. In the book of Proverbs, what does Proverbs 1 say is the beginning of all wisdom? The fear of the Lord. So what is David saying? If I could just give one thing to my son, here it is, Solomon. You're probably going to face all sorts of things. I could tell you stories and tell you what to do. Not going to do that. I'm going to tell you, to be a man means to follow the Lord with all of your heart and with all of your soul. And if you do that, what does it say? You will prosper in all that you do. Let me make sure I haven't. I put a quote down here. Great responsibility requires great strength and courage. Great strength and courage come from walking in the ways of the Lord. So I want to go on a little detour through our culture. I think I've said this before, but I think it's really important to deconstruct our culture. Because I say this all the time, by default, if we do nothing, our culture will shape us. In fact, it already has. That's part of what being a Christian is. It's deconstructing what the world has told you is true from the very beginning and accepting the capital K kingdom of heaven and saying, I'm now a citizen of the kingdom of heaven and I need to act accordingly. And there's collision courses. There's things that we've heard. So let's talk a little bit about our culture. The first thing that I want to talk about is that David tells him, be strong and show yourself a man. Kind of an aside. How many of you know that our culture, one of our hot button issues is a debate over what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman? Who gets to decide that? For the Christian, God gets to decide that. For the world, who gets to decide that? The individual, maybe a combination of the individual or like the power structure at the time gets to make laws. Now, this is a really obvious thing. A couple years ago, there was a film. Who was the guy, the bearded guy? I watched it. I was like, if I'm confessing my sin, I was like very entertained in a dark way. It was called What is a Woman? Did anyone see that one? And it was literally like experts could not define like what a woman is. And all he did was just ask experts, hey, what is a woman? You know, college professors, doctors, all these people, and no one could answer the question. And I find that so fascinating that the culture has so much to say, but when it comes to definitions, can't tell you what that is. For Solomon, David says this is what a man is. A man is someone who follows the way of the Lord. That's what a man is. all shapes and sizes and cultures and languages and preferences and personality types. But the way that you know is you follow the Lord. Now, what's fascinating is if we visited a foreign country, say something very far away from here, maybe like Turkey or Lebanon or something, how many of you would know that the ideas of what men and women do would be very different? How many of you would guess that even though there might be some differences getting worked out, if you attended a church service and began to talk about Jesus, that those differences would become less obvious? Hey, I'm called to be a man, to follow God's word. That's why I'm here. I'm called to raise strong children if I have them, to be the husband, faithful husband to one wife. These are the things that happen. So here's some ideas about our culture that I think we should talk about. Our culture is based on, here's my definition, the individual, self-realizing, pleasure-seeking consumer. Let me say it again. We are individualistic. So we see everything through the lens of how does it benefit me. We are self-realizing. This is like kind of relatively new in our Western world. What does self-realizing mean? I got to find my inner potential and live out who I'm created to be. I don't know if you know this, but a lot of self-help and a lot of like other religious movements will tell people things like everything you need to find happiness and contentment is found where? In you. Everything you need is already within you. And we can get in conversations and never realize that, but here's the huge difference about Christianity, and this is where we are like way, way different than that. It's that, what do you have inside of you? You have sin and darkness. We call it the fleshly desire, right? And when we live it out, we're not becoming self-realized. We're actually being poisoned towards more sin, more brokenness, more destruction. So why does it matter? Because we need an external something that can help us become who we were created to be. And what's that? Yeah, that's Christ. That's Christ in us. It's the Spirit at work in us. So we see ourselves often, the culture is telling us, you're an individual. You're a self-realizing individual who should be pleasure-seeking. So I made a little list in my outline here. Here are some things that make us pleasure-seeking consumers, individual, self-realizing. Here are some values that I think fall under that umbrella. To be an individual that does all those things, we want to have good looks. Is it any wonder that good looks and appearances seem to be more important than the substance behind them in our culture? So we are the culture of Botox, plastic surgery, workout galore, all of these things. Everything is about standing in the mirror looking good. Now, I am not commenting on you should not be healthy, that you shouldn't work out. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying there becomes an idolatry when that's your obsession. Why? Because that is the idolatry of self. Like, look at me in the mirror. I can become more perfect. I can become like a god unto myself. We are a culture who consumes. So to consume, you need some money. So we are also the culture that says like upward mobility at all costs. I read a study a while back, and they were taking Bible stories and asking churches in different cultures what the basic meaning of the story was. And the one I read was about Joseph. Joseph getting beat up by his brothers, tossed in a well. You guys know the story? Sold as a slave, off to Egypt he goes. Many decades later, rises to the top, saves Egypt. Hip, hip, hooray. His family comes because they're all going to starve to death. He discloses who he is. Everybody gets rescued, and they all go home happy. Good? So what does this story mean? There are some minor differences throughout different cultures, but the two big ones are in the Western world, that story was said, this is what the story means. It means that no matter how bad your circumstances, through hard work and perseverance, you can always rise back to the top. Isn't that interesting? Why is that? Because we're predisposed to the narrative of pick yourself up by the bootstraps. I went to a college with a guy who was first generation Russian. And I remember him telling me once, we did not grow up with the phrase, you can be whatever you want when you grow up. That is an American thing. No Russian mother ever told their child, you can be whatever you want when you grow up. And I remember him telling me, we are the pessimistic people. We're the people who have been overpromised and underdelivered for generations. So we're just anticipating the worst case scenario in absolutely everything. Very different. So a lot of Eastern cultures hear the story about Joseph and they say, if a single person in your family unit makes it, their job is to provide for the rest of the family who didn't. Same story, two very different things. Do you see the cultural narrative in each shaping what the story means? So what does the story mean? Yeah, the story is a story of redemption. It's a story of who God is and what God is capable of doing. We are the culture of freedom. I've said this 1,000 times. When you go on Instagram, nobody takes selfies at work. They take selfies on vacation or when they're at Ruth's Chris having a $200 steak, right? We value the freedom. This is the unhindered, adventurous, like adult male, right? The conquest of many women, but you can't tie me down. I'm going to Costa Rica. You had a Costa Rica hat. That's why it came to my mind. That's a narrative. That's something that our world says, hey, that's a value. It's interesting to be around a lot of young married men who feel the tug of that. Like, whoa, wait a second. I just accepted a lot of responsibility. There's a piece of me that yearns for like getting away and having adventure. I don't want to like leave it all behind, but I kind of want to leave it all behind for like a couple weeks. Like that's not a good recipe, right? These are narratives tugging at us. We're the culture of pleasure. We're the culture that created online pornography on a phone. Okay, let's just get it right. We're the culture of I can't remember what I always call it. Basically, we're the culture of like education. Like, where did you go to college? Have you noticed that? And then if somebody's like, I went to this college, and they're like, oh, well, where did you get your master's degree, right? Lots of bosses are like sure to make sure you hang your college diploma on the wall just so everyone knows, right? And so these are the things that are always pulling at us, that are telling us this way, this is the way to what is true and fulfilling in your life. God says, through David to Solomon, he says, do you want prosperity in all things? Here's how you do it. You submit yourself to God. Now, I think there's an element there of redefining what prosperity means, because how many of you know that word has been hijacked in Christian circles? And it's come to be known of, you can have all the prosperity that the world tells you can have through God if you just put your credit card information at the bottom of the screen here and auto pay for the rest of your life. That's called prosperity gospel. Okay, I'm going to throw one more curveball and then I'm going to try to tie this all back together. One of the things that our culture also loves to do that I don't think the Bible does at all, and this is very important. Our culture likes to pull ourselves apart into I'll call it our component parts. Bear with me, this is what this means. When we think of ourselves as many different pieces all put together. I'll give you a good example. The healths. We have mental health, emotional health, relational health, spiritual health, all of the healths, emotional health, you name it. You all following me? And so you might hear a conversation that goes something like this, like, well, how's your relational health going? As though it's like this siloed segment that's separate from you that you can kind of put over here and deal with and then kind of bring it back in. And so we see ourselves almost like this mechanical thing that's many different pieces and parts that you can kind of just take apart and then fix and put back together. The Bible doesn't tell us that we are like this siloed creature that has these many different tanks of different things. It says we are an integrated whole. So why can David say to Solomon, if you want to prosper in all things, submit yourself to God? It's interesting. So we have a culture that says, bear with me here because I don't want to be misunderstood. We have a culture that says, oh, you're feeling like depression and anxiety. Psychiatrist, therapist, that's a thing, right? You're having some physical health issues. Maybe it's you need to see a doctor. Maybe you need to see a personal trainer. Maybe you need to see a dietitian, right? Take care of your physical health. Maybe it's emotional or relational health. Maybe you need to see a therapist. Now, I am not saying any of those things in and of themselves are bad. In fact, some of those things are awesome in their right place. What I am saying is for the Christian To go pursue all those things without being submitted to God is saying, I am a siloed person that you can fix one individual part of me, while never actually asking, are you built on a solid foundation? The other thing that it doesn't account for is that when you're an integrated person, I think everyone knows this semi to be true, and there was just a study that was released. You should look it up. The study is SSRIs. Does anyone know what an SSRI is? It turns out that there's some natural ways that can mimic the effects of an SSRI. Do you know what they are? It's being in direct sunlight, eating healthy, and having enough sleep. Very interesting. Interesting. It's almost like whoever created your body knew how to work things out. Now, am I saying that depression does not exist? I'm not saying that at all. I am not that guy. What I am saying is that God created us as an integrated human, and our first question as Christians should be not, how's your relational health? It should be, hey, are you submitted to God? And if you're submitted to God and you're still having health issues, like, you should go see a doctor. I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm saying that we jump to the world's way of doing things very quickly, and we forget that the first thing that David says to Solomon, you want to prosper in your life, be submitted to God. Be submitted to God. And I love the fact that he says it on his deathbed. The one thing I can share with you right now, 20-year-old son who doesn't know anything because you haven't been out in the world yet, just submit yourself to God, and the rest will follow. In fact, that is the Bible verse I put there. Because what does the Bible say? Seek first the kingdom, then all will be added. Yeah, all will be added. We are not component parts. We're a whole human. To achieve prosperity, there's lots of ways to do that by the world's standards. There's only one way to do it by Christian standards. That's to submit to the Lord and then follow in his ways. Maybe God leads you to a lucrative career where you have lots of money. Is that a cultural value of like, yay, lots of money? Yes. But you didn't get there in the same way, did you? And once you get there, you don't use the finances the same way because last I checked, nobody's got like a pink Lamborghini. I legitimately saw I didn't know Lamborghini made SUVs. Did you guys know this? How long have they been doing that? I saw a neon pink metallic Lamborghini, and I just thought, man, I wish I had a picture of that, because if there was ever a car that just screamed in Orange County, look at me, hey, look over here, look at me, that was it. That was like, it was crazy. I didn't know they made that. It was all happening at once. So Solomon, you want to prosper in all that you do. Submit to the Lord. Love him. So here is the question for you. I probably forgot something, but that's okay. The Hebrew word that got translated there in our English version as prosperity is actually like a really complicated word with crazy flexible meaning. You could look it up on like Bible Gateway or one of those resources, and you would find out that this word can be translated basically a lot of stuff. So I just wrote here what it can be translated as most often. It can mean to have excellence, peace or peace of mind, abundance, wisdom, expertise, prosperity, prudence, or a skill in an area. For David, prosperity means all these things being part of your whole entire life. Discuss some of our culture's favorite strategies for reaching its own version of prosperity without God. Why do we so quickly attempt to achieve prosperity without much thought to God's will for our lives? And then describe a season or a moment of your life where you were submitted to the Lord and you experienced prosperity. Not the prosperity the world says, but the prosperity that's listed there in the definition of the word. All good? Why has our culture developed certain strategies to get to prosperity? This is a thought that I had. I think it was brewing and some dots got connected, but here's a thought for you. I think there's at least an element, if not the whole thing, is based around self-idolatry. So the idea is that whether we know it or not, I think philosophers would say it this way, that there's an animating spirit, something that motivates you to do what you do. And I think our culture has, like the old ad men of the 50s and 60s would say, we need to shape the story of what people think and then sell them the solution to the problems we created, right? So I think maybe this is where our culture has gone, maybe intentionally, maybe unintentionally, probably a blend of both, is that You, at your core, are worthy of being worshipped. And I can sell you all the things to make you the number one idol worth everyone else's worship too. You could be better looking, you could be richer, more free, more pleasure, unhindered by any responsibilities. And so there's an element of the people who made it, like the self-made people, can stand and say, by the ways of the world, I'm the one worthy of your worship. And even if they don't think of it that way or say like, oh, I would never think that, the metallic, bright, shiny, pink Lamborghini SUV says otherwise, right? Yeah.
The word influencer, right?
Influencer. Yeah. It's becoming a loose term, isn't it? Everybody is. Yeah, I think we talked about this a few weeks ago about like in the 90s, the best decade for rock and roll music. Come at me, bro. Just kidding. But the slogan for like the indie rock was we're not selling out, right? And I feel like influencer culture is the epitome of selling out everything. Like we will hawk this product, like Pepsi is the greatest soda ever made. If you think otherwise, you're a loser. And then 2 weeks later, the contract from Coke comes in. They're like, Pepsi is terrible, right? Like people are willing to be bought and sold to say whatever they need to. Influencer culture is very strange. And let this depressing thought sink in. American adolescents, when asked what they wanted to be when they grew up, the number one answer was influencer. Yeah. The last I had checked on the Barna research was that age for the kids who are saying that is getting younger and younger, which is unfortunate. The good news is there is now a movement in young adults generation, kind of out of nowhere. They're going back to like brick phones. I don't know if you've heard about this. There's a lot of young adults who have basically bought the entire thing, and out of nowhere, they're just opting out completely, which is really strange. There's an uptick in handwritten letters in Gen Z. Maybe there's some interesting things brewing. Maybe things get so bad, and we look at it and think it's getting so bad that generation realizes this is so bad, we're just going to do something different. So maybe the next counterculture is, forget the government, forget the world, we're going to church. Maybe that'll be the new counterculture. I saw this really funny meme. It was what you thought going against the world would look like, and it's like these commandos in like army paint with their rifles and their uniforms on, like a mud pit with rounds flying. And then underneath it says like what it actually is like to be countercultural. It's like a husband and wife walking into a church with 2 kids. Amen to that. Okay, so I just wrote this. When it comes to the world, you will be a servant to some master. There is no way around it, and here's why. Because you were made to serve a master. It's literally ingrained in you to serve a master, and the only question now is which master will you serve? If you choose to do nothing, the world will find you a master. Trust me. To say Jesus is my master, the Bible is clear, requires every single day making that commitment because the pushback is going to be strong and it's going to be aggressive. Okay, we got to move on, verse 5. I want to remind you, Solomon is roughly 20. David is probably in his mid-60s. He's on his deathbed. David sees the big picture of the world a little differently than a 20-year-old would, right? Just shy of 20, I was 18. All of a sudden, I decided I'm going to college. Guess what I did next? I walked into a Wells Fargo because I was 18. I opened an account, which they were very glad to give me because I also said, do you guys do student loans here? They were like, lock the door, don't let them out. This is pretty much it, right? Because why? 18-year-olds make some interesting decisions without consulting people. So David has some other advice for Solomon. On its face, I'm going to read it. Some of it seems like, whoa, I think that's murder. Maybe. So we'll talk about it, but we're going to circle back. So here's what it says, verse 5. Moreover, you also know what Joab, the son of Zeruiah, did to me, how he dealt with the 2 commanders of the armies of Israel, Abner, the son of Ner, and Amasa, the son of Jether, whom he killed, avenging in time of peace for blood that had been shed in war. and putting the blood of war on the belt around his waist and on the sandals on his feet. So let's stop right here. Here's the deal. Joab, you guys recognize the name? Joab has been around a while. Joab has been with David for a long time. Joab has been very loyal to David for a long time. Towards the end of 2 Samuel, Joab begins to change a little bit. He begins to think that maybe he knows better than David. Here's a good example that's not written here, but this happens with Joab. David is actually in conflict with his son, Absalom. Absalom is going to try to violently take the throne from his own dad, so David gets out of town. And when he gets out of town, as the story unfolds, there's an opportunity to get Absalom, and he sends Joab to do it. Does anybody remember what he tells Joab? What's that? Yeah. If there's any possible way to be gentle and bring him back to me, choose that. If peace is an option, choose that. Guess what Joab does? He's just like, meh, not worth the effort, just kill him. Just kills him. This is the stuff that Joab has begun to do. David points out something else Joab had done. Joab had decided that he actually knew better than David and that he should kill these two guys. He says that he avenged in peace what had happened in war. Now, this is very important. I think there's actually legality in our own world, although it's different. David is clearly recognizing there is a giant difference between how warriors act on the battlefield versus how they get to act during peacetime when we're trying to run a government and lead people. And what he says is Joab has turned into the kind of person who will shed blood during peace and not even care to clean himself off when the blood of his murderer gets on his civilian clothes. That's what he's saying. So, what does he say? He says, act therefore according to your wisdom. This is verse 6. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but act therefore according to your wisdom. Do not let his gray head go down to Sheol in peace. I did a lot of study about what this means. Does it mean to kill him? What it means is, David says, it's up to you. That's what it means. It means don't let him go to Sheol, his final resting place, in peace. You want to know why? Because if he gets to live his life in peace the way that he's going, he is going to be a giant pain in your rear end. Because what he has been doing in his old age, remember, David is 60 years old. He's been able to confront these sorts of things, to say, hey, I'm the guy who used to lead you in battle. I'm the guy who killed Goliath. I'm the guy who did that. You will respect me. Solomon doesn't have that authority. So David says, look, he's going to drive a wedge in here. He's left being a military guy, and now he's trying to become a politician, and we all know how that goes. So act wisely with him. Don't let him just live his life in peace. This is what I think it means. Keep a really, really, really close eye on this guy because he's going to cause you trouble. Verse 7. But deal loyally with the sons of Barzillai, the Gileadite. That's really hard to say. Barzillai the Gileadite. And let them be among those who eat at your table. For with such loyalty they met me when I fled from Absalom, your brother. So here's the story. Absalom basically is pressing in on Jerusalem. David collects all of his guys and his family, and they leave. There's a really cool section in there where David is describing where he's at, and he's like, I don't know if it's God's will. Maybe God's will is to punish me for my past sin and my kingship is over. I don't know. But in the meantime, I'm going to worship the Lord. And he's fleeing, and he flees over the river. I can't remember if it's the Jordan or the brook Kidron is what it says a lot in 2 Samuel. But when he gets there, his men are exhausted, and he meets this guy, Barzillai, who basically says, like, hey, I've heard of you. You've been a just man. I'd like to provide everything you need. Water your horses. Give your men rest. I will make sure you're protected. I'll bring you food. And so he does that. David, in turn, says, hey, if I get my kingdom back, you got to come live in Jerusalem. You're going to be like one of the highest heads of state because of what you've done. And Barzillai says, no thanks. I think he says, I'm basically an 80-year-old man. I've worked really hard for the family and the land that I have, and I'd rather just live out my days living the life I created. David really respects that, so he says to Solomon, hey, there's this guy who helped us in our greatest need, and I don't want to forget about him. Make sure his sons basically get the royal treatment for the rest of their lives. Verse 8, and there is also with you Shimei, the son of Gera, the Benjamite from Bahurim, who cursed me with a grievous curse on the day that I went to Mahanaim. Man, this is really testing me. But when he came down to meet me at the Jordan, I swore to him by the Lord, saying, I will not put you to death with the sword. Now, therefore, do not hold him guiltless, for you are a wise man. You will know what you ought to do to him, and you shall bring his gray head down with blood to Sheol. Yeah, use your wisdom. You should know what to do, but just in case you're not catching my drift, kill him. That's what he says. Okay. Very interesting story if you wanted to check that one out. That is in 2 Samuel chapter 16. Shimei is basically this guy who's so loyal to Saul that when David shows up years after, he still throws rocks at him and his men. He goes out of his way. Here comes David, picking up rocks, throwing it at him, telling him, you're the scourge of the earth. Long live King Saul. And David is like, dude, not a good look for the new king to just axe this dude by the side of the road. That's kind of what he's deserved. But hey, I'm the new king. Need some public favor going on, so I won't kill you. He swears an oath to him. And then he tells Solomon, hey, that guy should have killed him. I swore an oath. You didn't. Go axe him. That's what he says. Okay, so here's the SparkNote version. And I think this is for leadership. Whether you're in a position of leadership over lots of people or you're not. Maybe you have been in the past and you have some experience to share. Maybe you will be in the future and you're growing into that. I think there's 3 things going on here that are important. David tells Solomon first with Joab. Joab is a tricky personality who has a lot of upward mobility that he wants. He wants to take your power from you and he's willing to weasel his way to get it. How many of you know that this is how people often act? Especially when power is what they want to broker, not money, they want power. They're willing to do whatever it takes. Chet was describing kind of the way that you think a promotion works and how it often actually works. You think, his words were, you think that you show up at a job, you just work hard, you do your job description, people will notice, you're promoted. But in fact, you show up and you realize, there's personalities and there's a pecking order here, and I got to decide whose team am I on, who am I going to shun, who am I going to buddy up to, who has the power. So I think if you're taking notes, here's the first thing. I think David says, for a personality like Joab, monitor him. Keep a really close eye on him. He has the potential and the capability to do a lot of damage quickly, so don't lose sight of a guy like Joab. Is he a bad guy? He's shown a lot of loyalty to David in the past. He showed up when nobody else showed up in the past. Now it's questionable. Keep a close eye on him. Use your wisdom to see you through. The second one is Barzillai. Barzillai, I think, is this person who's not on anybody's radar. Nobody in the Bible, if you read through 2 Samuel, would say Barzillai should be first in line for a major reward from the king. He's a fly under the radar, did the right thing, got offered a huge reward and said, nah, no thanks. I just did the right thing because it was the right thing. I'm not looking for a handout. Have a great day. David, I think, is telling Solomon, not just for Barzillai, but for people like him, you need to show honor to people who have earned it because of their integrity and their standing upright. There are people in our midst. Maybe they're the people who are just the quiet behind the scenes. They show up every time. And honestly, they can be hard to remember sometimes. They're just so consistent. They're always there, right? It's like you miss the trees for the forest. David says, don't overlook these people. They deserve to be honored. And then there's Shimei. This is difficult because in our world, in our context, we want to impose what we think is good and right on the ancient world. So Shimei, let me tell you what I mean. Shimei has a hatred that runs very deep for David and his people, for his lineage. He will undermine, divide, and flex any way he can to make sure David's line does not have the throne. David says, my wisdom is this: you need to remove him. Why? Because David is not an American in 2025 who thinks of me, 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 me. The reason he's a good leader is he thinks of all of us and what's best for us. And he says, look, there is somebody who will undermine and divide and ruin the continuity that we have created if you don't eliminate him. Now you might think like, well, killing him, isn't there another way? Not really. In the ancient world, there really isn't. There's not a legal or justice system because guess who the ultimate judge is at this point? The king. In fact, when Solomon builds the temple, he builds a giant place where he can hear cases. You might remember one of the cases. Remember? Woman accidentally rolls over and kills her infant son, steals the son of another woman, and then they come before him. You should keep reading 1 Kings if you want to know how that goes. Very, very wise man. So here it is. There are people that should be monitored. You should keep a close eye on them. They have tremendous potential. They have history and loyalty, but they also, something feels off. They have potential to be a divider. You're not ready to say, you got to go, but there's people you should keep an eye on. There's people you should honor, that you should get way better at honoring and paying attention to. Then there's people you should remove. And when I say you should, there's a piece of this that we have to remember. David is the king. Solomon is the king of an entire nation. This does not mean that I got to go to work and I got to figure out who the Joabs, the Barzillais, and the Shimeis are. Like, you're a Shimei, you're fired. And then your HR is like, yo, you can't just fire people without cause here, brother. This is a problem. That's not what I'm getting at. I'm getting at when we are seeking, David is handing the kingdom off to Solomon at a time of great peace and prosperity for the very first time. He is saying the thing that we need to protect at all costs is unity. We don't want to go back to war. We want to build. We want to have an opportunity to worship the Lord in our own land like was always promised. If we want that, we have to be highly aware of who is in high-level positions. So, monitor, honor, remove. Here's the question. Here's the thought. David's insistence on his son seems violent and eyebrow-raising, but there's wisdom for leaders to be very well aware of the personalities they are leading and to consider the overall health of the people they are leading when dealing with those strong personalities. There's also the biblical principle of leaders being held to a higher standard. So here's the question. When it comes to difficult personalities, how do you differentiate when to be strong and confrontational versus when to be graceful and let things go? How do you show honor to those who have shown themselves to be faithful and generous to you in your times of need? And then I'm going to add a chunk of the question. When do you need to separate or remove somebody for the sake of unity? That's the third part. So just think Joab, Barzillai, Shimei, and you'll get the question. All good? Okay, let's take 10 or 12 minutes, and then we will finish up and read about David's death. Ready, set, go. For the sake of time, I'm going to jump right to verse 10. So no matter where you're at, let's just pause and we'll finish. We'll finish with strength. Then, so the last thing the Bible tells us David did was leave this information to his son. Then David slept with his fathers and was buried in the city of David. Let's pause right here for a moment. Very interesting. As late as Acts chapter 2, the apostles knew where David was buried. Very interesting. There is a church historian and theologian who went by the name Jerome. Some of you may have heard of Jerome. Jerome mentions knowing where David was buried. Scholars believe that after the land had been turned over and switched hands enough times, a lot of documents and libraries burned. We don't actually know, but I do find it fascinating. Wherever they buried David, the apostles knew where he was. Isn't that kind of interesting? It says David slept with his fathers and was buried in the city of David. Name the city. And the time that David reigned over Israel was 40 years. Significant? 40 is a very significant number. I'll let you do the homework if you want to piece some things together. He reigned 7 years in Hebron and 33 years in Jerusalem. So Solomon sat on the throne of David his father, and the kingdom was firmly established. It's interesting. All the way back in 1 Samuel, Samuel made the trek to meet an obscure guy we didn't know anything about at the time. His name was Jesse, because God told him the true king over Israel was one of the children of Jesse. That promise from Samuel has been fulfilled. He's now passed it along to the second of his bloodline, Solomon, and the kingdom is firmly established. I think one thing to say here is that kingdom is still firmly established in Jesus. Here's the quote: "He was a shepherd, a soldier, an outlaw, a king, a fugitive, a sinner, a saint, a poet. His experiences were the writing of God on his life, making him into a man after God's own heart." We're going to push forward into Solomon in the next couple times we meet, but I want to leave with one thing. And I think this is very interesting for the time we're living in because of how divided and polarized we are. The story of David is very fascinating, not just in the Bible. It's very fascinating in kind of the history, the annals of history over kings. So I don't know if you know this, but it's very common for, let's say, the Roman emperors, as they're entering their later years, what do? They call in the historians. We need you to write my history. And what are they going to write? The good stuff, right? Okay, so this is how it works. If they pass the throne to somebody in their own bloodline, guess what the history of the previous king is? The good stuff. If it's taken from them in like a military coup, guess what that person does? Call in the historians. This guy was the worst emperor of all time. He's terrible. The people hated his guts. He didn't give free bread on Wednesdays. They wanted to revolt. He murdered lots of innocent people. He was the scum of the earth. Guess who's the man? Me. That's how it works. All the way down. And so how does Roman history mostly read? There's nuance, of course, but it reads much more like this guy was the greatest king ever, or this is the worst person ever. Does that make sense? It is very rare in the ancient world for someone like David, somebody who was revered even to this day, to have an account written of his life that is so obviously real. This is a man who sinned really big, who was forgiven really big, who had ups and downs, who had incredible triumphs and really, really dark valleys, and it records all of it. So I think here's a lesson on David's life that I've been thinking about, is that there is an element of the people to protect the image of their leader, especially if they like the leader, to protect the image and want that person to be seen as this perfect human being. So I wrote this: we over-project and highlight the strengths of the people we like, and we over-project and highlight the weaknesses or shortcomings of the people we don't. And so even in our own minds, our own conversations, we write history that is not as nuanced as David. That, hey man, this is a super flawed human being. The Bible says, pray for them. This is somebody I don't care for much, pray for them. I read a book a while back called The 5 Presidents. It was a really awesome book. It was about a guy who was in the Secret Service for 5 consecutive presidencies. And he says right at the very beginning, I'm not going to tell you my politics. Some of these guys' politics I thought were vile. Some of these guys I liked. But I'm here to humanize all of them. And when I think about that book, I think about stories that he wrote in there. He wrote stories about JFK playing in the pool with his children. Talked about moments of Eisenhower with his wife. And just the human nature. And I always think of that book and I think, these are people we should pray for. We shouldn't make them into kings. We shouldn't make them into devils. We should recognize that they're human beings. The Bible is very comfortable with David being exactly who he is because the Bible story is not that David is the leader. It's that God is the leader. And when we're submitted to God, we don't have to pretend that somehow humans are better or worse than they are. They're humans. So we're going to go into Solomon. If you want a little bit of a head start, here's sort of where we're going. Solomon comes to power, and he has something of... I think a moment in history that relates a lot to us. All the trappings and all of the outward appearances appear as though the prosperity that was promised to him is happening. But appearances are not everything. And sometimes the outward appearance of life, say in a place like Orange County, can mask the fact that maybe there's some neglect on the spiritual front. So for instance, right out of the gate, you can keep reading in 1 Kings. Solomon decides, I'm building the temple for God. Anybody know how long it takes him to build that temple? 7 years. And then he's like, I'm building myself a palace. Anyone want to guess how long that takes? 13 years. And guess whose is bigger? And guess whose is right across the street? It's literally like a God's house, Solomon's house. And on the outward, it looks like, man, we're finally living into prosperity. There's not a lot of war. There's a lot of peace. And the outward appearance is like we finally made it into the land of milk and honey. But there's some things that are beginning to crack behind the scenes. So let's pray together. Thank you for bearing with me. God, thank you. Thank you for your faithfulness to just speak to us through your word. We just say that we believe it. We accept it as a light and a lamp unto our path. We also receive that there are ways in our life that need to be sanded and polished down, that we're not perfect people. We are sinners redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. And so, God, would you never, ever let us to slip into this mentality of our world that we've made it, that we're worth being worshipped. We always remember that you and you alone are worthy of our worship. We want to be servants to you as our master. God, in the ways that we give ourselves over to being servants of other masters, we repent of that. In the ways that we're doing it and we don't even know, would you be gracious to us? Would you maybe have friends or people close to us point it out? Would you remind us in those moments that we don't walk in shame, we walk in forgiveness and grace that's for us in Jesus? So we love you. We give you this time. Thank you that rain or shine, summer, winter, it doesn't matter. We have this space to gather to study your word. It's not lost on us that many people around the world would love to have this exact thing and they can't. So we just say thank you for it. We love you. We give you this time. We ask that you would go before us into the rest of the week. Amen. Amen.